Hello everyone. I welcome you all. My name is Jacobson. I've been saying that for many years. But based on principle in Jewish mysticism, actually a prayer we say every day, that existence is refreshed and renewed every moment. This is a concept of perpetual creation, which, if you heard this idea, let's say a century or two ago, you may have seen it as bizarre or as spooky. But today, it's common knowledge that we live in a dynamic universe, and even when things seem inanimate or so-called dead on the surface, things are brewing, pulsating with energy all the time. And any force in existence needs constant renewal, just like we need to exhale and inhale, and New York needs its sirens every few seconds, and our hearts contract and expand. Life is constant flux, constant movement. So it shouldn't be surprising that in mysticism, especially in Jewish mysticism, the focus is that beneath the surface there's a constant renewal of energy that gives us, that sustains us, and therefore the good news is that life, in that sense, if you can tap into that marrow, that pipeline, that electric, that energy source, then life should never be boring, because everything is constantly happening, constantly being renewed. So even though we meet again, and we may know each other for a long time, based on this principle, we're always changing. The problem is that we're often captive and taken hostage by the outer surface level of our routines and habits, and that's where we get trapped in the so-called the monotonous, the boring. But you see, when two people are in love, or when someone is just generally their spirit is one of a sparkling spirit, whatever they do, wherever they go, is always alive. There's no such thing as anything that's boring. You can look at something, and it may seem to the naked eye, or technically as being the same, but they always look at it with a new energy, with a new attitude, and so on. So there's an expression in the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, King Solomon says, in a so-called despondent tone, he says that what do we already accomplish in this world? And he uses the expression, all the rivers flow to the sea and the sea does not get full. A generation comes and goes and there's nothing new under the sun. So the emphasis is under the sun. Yes, under the sun, if you live a life confined and affected by the gravitational pull, I mean that metaphorically, by our material lives, life can be quite monotonous and quite repetitive. And anything that's repetitive becomes a routine and a habit, and we get bored. Whereas if you go above the sun, in the sense where you are able to touch a nerve or touch an aspect of life, same experience, but you see a different dimension of it, it's constantly alive. So I hope, I bless us all, that we should see each other always this way. Shouldn't get bored with each other. And we meet, even though I've been doing this class now for 30 some years, I feel every time it's new and fresh. And even if some of the similar faces, but those are faces. The fact is, under the surface, we're all constantly changing, constantly new. Unfortunately, some of us don't even know that. So we get trapped into the more plastic version of our own selves, which is our outer version doesn't go through any changes, as opposed to being in touch with the inner vivacity of who we really are, and then everything is changing for the good, for the better. So, as a small introduction, that leads me into the topic of this discussion here, and that is the invincibility of vulnerability. Yes, it rhymes a little. Now, do a Google search for the word vulnerable or vulnerability. So usually you get a pretty good, accurate picture of what is the most common definition. So of course the first few entries that come up in Google, I did this, you can test it. I did it twice actually to make sure, and Wikipedia is often up there, or some dictionary or thesaurus, so on. And yes, there's the definition: vulnerability, as most of us, our knee-jerk reaction would be being open to danger, to being exposed, being unprepared, all negative, All his definitions I saw in the Webster Dictionary and some of the other dictionaries, all negative terms. In business, vulnerability is too much debt. In human terms, it's being exposed, being able to be hurt. Forget all the exact interpretations. I was quite actually taken by that, because I couldn't find one definition of vulnerability I'm talking about the common dictionary definition that was positive. So then, of course, in my years of experience and speaking to people and asking people their thoughts, what emotions conjure up, what feelings do you have when you hear the word vulnerable? Someone says, are you vulnerable? Most people's reaction is a negative one. It's connected to concern, fear, it can be hurt, danger. These are the words. Now, you can try it out yourself. What's your free association without much thinking? I'm vulnerable means I don't have defenses up. I'm not protected. And so we're here to discuss tonight, is that actually true? And hopefully to suggest that there's a whole different definition of vulnerability, and without really appreciating, in a sense, we're compromising perhaps our most important aspect of our souls, of our psyches. Because as we shall discuss, vulnerability is actually the essence of who we really are, and the most positive, it's the most powerful force inside of you. So how do you reconcile that with all these definitions that are out there, that are not just made up? Very simple. Remember, all definitions of words, like any language, is made up by a society. Society associates things with different words. And it all comes down to how we interpret it. So the vulnerability per se is not bad or good. It's just that it's interpreted this way and experienced this way. So you could have, let's say, a word called warmth. Warmth for most people is a positive term. But if enough of us are hurt or affected by warmth in a negative way, you could see warmth as being something that is also associated with negative stuff. And students of linguistics and language know words are just what you put into it. Culture can completely change the name of words. Just take words like God, religion, faith. You tell me what happened. What do these words mean? For some people, these words are they go ballistic when they hear them. For some, these are words that are very comforting. So it has a lot to do with not the actual definition. A dictionary will give you a definition, a social definition of that word and how it's applied. Not necessarily an objective definition of the per se the word. So I submit that the reason we associate vulnerability with all these negative connotations is because our psyches are programmed, and we live in a world that is constantly reinforcing a certain attitude to life, and that life is dangerous, that people are exploitive, and therefore in a world which is a hostile world, a volatile world, and you don't know who may use you or may not use you, vulnerability is automatically a dangerous term, because it means you're thrown into a jungle in a world that's unpredictable, hostile, as I said. Dog eats dog. People are driven by self-interest. So being vulnerable is a very dangerous thing. You don't want to be vulnerable when there are predators around. However, if we looked at the world or at people, and just hypothetically, imagine you were in an environment with friends, complete friends that you really can trust, no matter what, then the word vulnerable will not necessarily associate with anything negative. Because if you're in a trusting environment, what's wrong with being vulnerable? No one's going to take advantage of it. So many of our attitudes to concepts and ideas, I submit here, are shaped and formed by social mores and social changes. Take the word love. Love is a good word. Now love, very few people will say love is a bad thing. Some people will. Those that have been hurt by it may say love is you can't live with it, you can't live without it, that type of attitude. But most people would associate love with some positive elements. The love of a parent to a child. People will do things for each other in the name of love. Love is a need. But love has also become very much defined by a society. What is love? For example, if someone asks, is love giving or taking? Okay, so the safe answer is both, of course. But bottom line is, how most people experience love? As taking or as giving? Most people see it as a need. It's a need. I have a need. And especially if you've been deprived of love, when you should have received it unconditionally as a child, it definitely becomes a need, because then you become desperate for it. And tell me how many relations are affected just by that statement. One person's desperate need for love, trying to compensate for a love that they didn't get when they were younger. I'm not trying to oversimplify or overgeneralize, But you ask therapists how much what I just said affects most people. It's a major impact what I've just said. How people are affected by it is obviously different. We're all different. But that mere fact that people are looking to compensate for something that they were lacking, that they should have received from their parents, is a major force today in how we search for love. We may not even know it. And how, therefore, who we search for, what kind of partner, and what our expectations in love are all shaped by our subjective view of what we think love is or what we think it's not. So there you go, there's a word that can be used in so many different directions. Now, if someone were to tell you love and vulnerability are synonymous, many people don't like to hear that. I want love, but I don't want to be vulnerable. Because if I'm vulnerable, I can be hurt. So, is it possible to have a love where you don't have vulnerability and therefore a love where you can never be hurt? Think about it. There are enough, let's call it escape artists and all kinds of magicians today that are trying to master that art. I hope you never dated one of those. Maybe you're one of them. People who are mastering the art of having love in their lives without too much vulnerability. Try it out. I would say that it's often a major factor because people don't want to be hurt, but they want the love. So how does that work out? How much does that impact in people's relationships? How much does it impact your relationships? Think about it. A little context, It's something also people don't like to talk about. How many people are going to say, something? A big part of my game plan is I want your love, but I want to make sure that I'm getting more than you're getting, so I don't get hurt. Very few people are going to make that statement because it doesn't sound romantic, But many of us act that way when we test people. We test again and again and again to see if someone's really loyal, someone will hurt us. These things create distortions in a relationship where one person starts realizing, why are you testing me? Why do you think that this is not going to work? Now it's obvious, because if you've been hurt and you have a wound, or if it's a deep wound, you're not just easily going to open up. So I don't know if I have to elaborate on this. I can elaborate at length about this. This topic people don't like to talk about openly so much because it's that, no pun intended, because it makes you feel vulnerable. This topic is a very vulnerable topic. How vulnerable I truly am. And we live in a world of negotiations where we know in business you don't show your cards, you don't show your hand, a lot of bluffing necessary, and especially if you're insecure or have low self-esteem, one of the things you're going to do is make sure to put on an image that you're secure. Nobody likes to be perceived that way. So there you go. You've got yourself a vicious cycle. How do you get out of this? How can you truly be honest when you don't really trust somebody to be honest with them because maybe they'll reject you, maybe they'll judge you? Which is another fear in our society of why we don't want to be vulnerable. But I submit again, as I said before, that it is the greatest gift to be able to have someone that you can be vulnerable with. It's the greatest gift to have someone that you can trust on that level, and there will be no judgment, and not taken advantage of, and no rejection, just because you may have your own inner fears. But to understand this, we need to really look at the world in a new way. Because as I said before, let's go back to that premise. Let's just take an example. If you think the world is a jungle, I say the world, your world, the people around you, then obviously is a certain attitude. What do you do when you go into dangerous territory? You come well armed. You come very well prepared. You're careful wherever you go. You look over your shoulder. Right? If you come into an environment where you know that you can trust, it's a warmer environment, an environment that you've learned that this is a peaceful place, or it's a place where you can feel comfortable, your guard is down, your attitude is different. So I would say that most people, and I say most because I've met every person on earth, but based on what I've seen, what I've read, live that type of life. Children, by the way, well, it's not a by the way, it happens to be fundamental to our discussion, but by the way, in this context right now, children are completely vulnerable by no choice of their own, actually. A newborn child does not have anything to protect themselves. They're completely under the control of the nurturing or the should be nurturing parent. That's what a child is. A child is, in a sense, an embodiment, an incarnate of vulnerability. Now the child grows, but where does the child learn its attitudes? As it develops attitudes, it picks up attitudes from those around it, from the adults. So if it grows up around, this little boy or girl grows up around, bless you, around insecure adults who hide their vulnerability, what is the child going to do with its vulnerability? It's going to start being ashamed of it. It's going to start seeing it as a liability, as a handicap, as an impediment, and we'll stop celebrating it. So if we want to put it into a cliche, which I don't like cliches, no one likes cliches, but listen, we live in a world of bumper stickers and cliches. Love, as we shall discuss, is the celebration of vulnerability. The day you can celebrate your vulnerability is the day where you learn to love in a healthy way. And I know it's counterintuitive to everything that we think about when we hear that word vulnerable. And in order to appreciate it, we have to look at ourselves and life in a new way. Like I said, if you look at yourself or you look around you as basically that we are inherently selfish individuals, inherently always, in other words, at risk because someone may exploit or take advantage, then it's very clear what the conclusion is. You need your armor. You better have a very good arsenal to protect yourself, especially from those that are special predators that are very manipulative and very good at what they do. However, if there's another perspective on life, which is obviously what I'm going to submit here, then the attitude may be different. And I'm not suggesting a naive approach that there aren't predators. That's not what I'm getting at. The discussion here is not whether there are people who take advantage and exploit. That's indisputable. The question is whether it shapes your whole attitude to life, and that's it. That becomes your definition of life. And it controls how you live. Which really then means you're a victim of this attitude. You're a victim of those type of people. So we all know there are people like that. We all know this world is possible to have people like that. We all know when you meet someone, you can't know who this person is. So I'm not suggesting any of that. I'm not changing that picture. The question is, what experiences do we have? If you've only experienced, for example, selfishness around you, if you've only seen people who are self-absorbed and they're busy exploiting others, obviously that becomes your standard. And any exception is going to be an anomaly. Aberration, you should say. Whereas if you've grown up around people that were really noble, special, sensitive, kind, gentle, then the aberration may be the selfish. Well, Judaism and Torah, that's what it comes to do. It comes to give us paint a backdrop of a higher and better reality than the one we're usually exposed to. Frankly, this is really what any real education should be doing. And any parent, and any role modeling, and any mentor, what they really want to give us, is another perspective. You think life is ugly? You think things are disappointing? You think things have to end up in disaster? I will show you another picture, paint another picture of possibilities, and therefore you can readjust your expectations, and therefore look and seek and yearn for a better world. But if you don't know what a picture like that looks like, obviously, if your image of life is dark, then that's going to be all your tools and all your attitudes, and every move you make is going to be shaped in darkness. You do certain things. It's dark. You're going to have flashlights and lights and all kinds of things to protect you and to be able to see through the dark. But if someone shows you a light, shows you a picture that's very bright of yourself or of others, then your attitude is different. So in a very general sense, this is really what we do. What we do in a class like this, look at the Torah, look into Judaism, and try to see a better world. Again, qualify, not be naive and say, the rest of the world, what I saw until now is not correct. No, it's broadening your horizon. What you've seen is true, but what you've seen is a limited perspective. There's a bigger picture of yourself and of others. So we come these 2 months of Av and Elul that we're right now in the transition of. So it's a little introduction. So the 12 months in the Hebrew year, I've discussed in the previous classes, especially during this series about shadows, the last 4 or 5 weeks, that Av is the saddest month of the Jewish calendar. Highlighted by the 9th of Av, which is the saddest day of the month of Av, and that is Tisha B'Av, when the temples were destroyed and other tragic events took place. But Av leads us into Elul, which begins exactly next week. What day does it begin? Where are we now? It's around 3 days. Tuesday. A week from yesterday, today. El is a very interesting month because it's like an antithesis to Av.
Wednesday's Rosh Chodesh.
Right. Yeah. Week. It's 2 days Rosh Chodesh always. It's actually the beginning of 60 days, which has special meaning here because the book I did on 60 days. So some of the themes I'm talking about are based, or actually I was the author of the book, so I guess the book is based on what I'm saying, not I'm saying based on the book. However you want to interpret it, you know. But the bottom line is, it's actually not me nor the book. It's from sources that precede me. I should really be for full disclosure, and that is that these 2 months carry with them a fascinating story of life. So we all know, and we're told this many, many times, that life is filled with is a cycle. Life is a cycle. There was a Rabbi that once told somebody who had suffered a great financial loss after making a large fortune, and I think it was the time in Vienna, the first Ferris wheel, I think, was invented and displayed in Vienna, like the late 19th century. So it was like a big news. So he said to him, "There's a lesson from we learn lessons from everything. We learn a lesson from a Ferris wheel. You can look it up. This large Ferris wheel that was built. It was like a phenomenon. I think they had some World's Fair or some type of thing, but they built this a Ferris wheel. What's the lesson we learn from it? That life is a wheel. Galgal hachazer is the expression. It's a turning wheel. It's a returning wheel, you can say. When you're on top, you know, as it continues to turn, that it's going to go low down and you're going to come to the bottom. But when you're on the bottom, always know that it'll continue to turn, you'll come back to the top. It sounds like a simple lesson, but as I said earlier, it's not so simple. Because psychologically, it's hard to align ourselves to that attitude. We like to always be on top. And we're there, we take it for granted, and never believe that we're ever going to turn from there. But as the wise, like Joseph, advised the Egyptians that prepare the year of plenty for the years of famine. Most of us don't know how to do that. When things are going well, we take it for granted. Tomorrow is forever. Tomorrow will never come. So understanding life that way is really understanding life like I've always mentioned, as a good swimmer. A good swimmer does not mean an excellent swimmer is not someone who knows how to swim under all circumstances. That's not true. A good swimmer knows how to navigate under all circumstances. And when a storm comes and the tide turns against him or her, they will not fight it. They will reserve their energy and they'll just let it carry them. And when the tide turns in their direction, then they'll use it as a forward thrust. And you see this. You see it in sports. You see how sprinters run. You see how cyclists cycle. You see how much they use aerodynamics and they use the resistance as well. And if you look at nature, all this obviously we're copying nature. Look how geese fly in that formation, that V formation. If you study why they fly in that V formation, they study that V formation is because it magnifies their ability to fly on the wave, the air thrust of those around them. And a V formation is a perfect formation to maximize. And the geese will change. They'll change the order of who's flying first and so on. But that type of flight, they maximize the use of the energy exerted by those around them. And you'll see this throughout nature. Nature is, of course, brilliant at this. Well, what some people call nature, others call God. In some books it says nature is a word you use for anything that you cannot explain. So you say it's nature. I'm just shutting my thing. It's making sounds. Sorry. So we learn much about the efficiency of how to use. That's what a good swimmer is a good navigator. So the same thing in life. Life is a cycle whether you like it or not. You're either going to fight it, or you're going to go along with it. Those that go along know how to survive. They don't just survive, they thrive. They know that at times when you're, let's say, more a down moment, now's the time maybe to reserve your energy, to reflect, introspection. When there's an up energy, then is the time to maybe make the move forward. Everything has its role. Everything has its benefit. And nature, again, is a perfect example. There's no such thing as, if you say, what's greater, a contraction of your heart or an expansion? The answer is you need both. You can't have an expansion if you don't have a contraction. You pull back in order to shoot an arrow forward. And the farther you go back, the further it will fly. This is a two-step process of one step. So someone will just see you moving back and say, why are you going backwards? They say, you're a fool. I'm only going backwards in order to get the energy to go forward. But in life, we fight this natural cycle because we want it to be good. We want it to be comfortable. We want to be always stable. We don't like unpredictability. I submit there as well that this is a big part of our not being able to be vulnerable. When you don't want to be vulnerable, and you don't want to ever feel that you're unprotected, you always have to be moving. People who are very comfortable have no problem. At times, the Ferris wheel is now in a lower state. Now it's time to gather my energy. Who said I have to do anything? But you have to be very secure to be able to feel that way. If you're not, you will fight the cycle. Because when things go down, you'll feel that it reflects on you. And I've observed this. I've seen people who've had very difficult things in their lives. And other people, and not only have survived, come out of it in unbelievable strengths. And other people with far less tragedy, far less challenges, can't handle it. So are they wired different? I think they're wired different has a lot to do with how secure they are and how what they saw as children and the adults around them, how did they cope when it was difficult? The real good swimmers, what they learned was when it's difficult, it's an opportunity to, as I said, gather the energy, make your strategy, introspection, and so on. For someone who's insecure, however, when there's a down moment, they let it reflect on themselves. They think, oh, that just reaffirms that I'm worthless. The first person doesn't think that way. The first person says, listen, that's life. A storm has come, and now I have to deal with it. Not that he likes it, not that he or she likes it, but it's a reality. That's the cycle of life. Life has cycles. A person who's insecure, however, as soon as there's something that like shakes your boat, rocks your boat, right away you start reflecting on you. What's wrong with me? It just affirms what I always thought or what others have told me. So it has a lot to do with your own self-perception. It's a lot to do with how you react and how you build your life. The people who are able to be at peace, that inner peace comes from a very inner place of harmony, an inner tranquility. That is not so common today. You don't find many people who have that. They can sit for hours and just be calm. Nothing can shake them. And the greatest events in life are not going to overwhelm them, and the tragic things in life will not overwhelm. That doesn't mean they're immune or numb to all these experiences. It just means it does not shape them. They're not get defined. You can suffer and not become a sufferer. So think about it. When you are having a pleasurable moment, do you become the experience you have? When you're experiencing a negative thing, do you become that, or are you experiencing it? So there are things that it's good to become if it's a positive thing. But a person should never become a sufferer. But we do become, because we become shaped by our experiences. So going back to this whole issue of how we look at ourselves and how we look at what Judaism does is trying to paint a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is there's a cycle. And the month of Av, the Ferris wheel is at a very low moment. And the month of El, the Ferris wheel moves upward all the way, leading towards its climax to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, the high holidays. And they come right after one after another. Because in the historical story, what's the historical story? So as you may know by now, just the Jewish calendar is very much reflective of life cycles. As I just said, time is a cycle, a spiral. But also in Jewish history, what happens? The Jews leave Egypt, and it takes place the 15th of Nisan. We celebrate that. It's like the beginning of the certain calendar, even though we count the calendar from Rosh Hashanah, Tishrei, but there's also a count from the lunar month begins with the holiday of Passover. They count 49 days of the Omer, and on the 50th day they receive the Torah at Sinai. 50 days from the day they left Egypt. Then what happens is Moses goes up on the mountain, spends 40 days and nights there, studying Torah, receiving the Torah. Now it's in the Jewish calendar. From the 15th of Nisan, we've gone to the 6th of Sivan. 40 days later is the 17th of Tammuz. Moses descends, and to his chagrin, the Jews have built a golden calf. So we got now 50 days and 40 days, right? 50 from Passover to Shavuos, 40 days, and that day becomes a fast day, the beginning of the 3 weeks, which leads into Tisha B'Av and concludes with 9th of Av. Moses is up on the mountain to ask for forgiveness. And he goes up on the mountain on the 17th of Tammuz second time to pray for forgiveness for this great sin and betrayal that the Jewish people perpetrated. It comes down Rosh Chodesh El next Wednesday. Unsuccessful. It's the next 40 days. And goes up a third time 40 days. So now we have 50, 40, 40, and a third set of 40 days. And this time he stays up a whole month of Elul, and he's successful, and he comes down 40 days later, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is 170 days from Passover. Passover 50 days to Shavuos, then 3 sets of 40 days, 120 plus 50 is 170. That covers almost half a year. And this cycle that I just described is the cycle that all of us experience in life. We experience some type of transcendence and freedom, some opening, some inspiration, fall in love, some type of hope, whatever it may be. Then we always experience at some point some loss, betrayal, something breaks, something abandons us, a broken promise, a shattered dream, one form of betrayal or another. Sometimes we're the ones that do the betrayal. The question now is, okay, when things are going well, great. Now that there is a loss or a betrayal or a fall, what happens now? So comes this period in time that begins with Rosh Chodesh El, that next week. In the last 40 days, concluding Yom Kippur, and tells us there's hope. That you can fix something after it was broken. This in essence is these 60 days. The 60 days that begin Rosh Chodesh El and end with Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, 2 months, El and Tishrei, the month of the preceding the high holidays and the high holidays, is a 60-day journey that teaches us that nothing is impossible, that nothing is irreparably broken. There's no such thing as damaged goods. You are not damaged goods. We all can be hurt and wounded, but we don't get destroyed. And that's the story in a nutshell. So Av is the story of the fall, and Elul is the story of the rise. But a rise that comes after the fall, and a rise that comes after the fall is far greater. Which explains why Elul, the month itself, the word Elul, is an acronym, 4 letters. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. It's the sign of Virgo, the sign of love. Elul. And so Elul is love, where Av is destruction, Elul is love. The question is, what is love? Going back to our question earlier. The question is back to vulnerability. Well, interesting thing, when you read about the success of the 12-step program, devised mid-20th century, early 20th century. So interesting how it came to be and its success, very grassroots type of movement. And of course, the first of the 12 commandments in the 12-step program is that, I'm just using it as an example, is that I've discovered my life is out of control and I surrendered to a higher power. So the exact words, but that's the content. Fascinating way, it parallels the first of the 10 commandments. The first 10-step program. The original 10-step program. What's the first of the 10 commandments? Let's read it. Anoichi Hashem Elokecha Asher Etzisicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am the Lord your God that freed you, took you out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim in Hebrew is not just Egypt. Mitzrayim means I took you out of constraints. It's essentially the same statement except without the word God. They call it higher power. I can't do it myself, so I surrender to a higher power that helps me do it. It's the first of the 10 commandments. Not that just I'm your God. I'm your God that took you out of your own constraints. Why? Because a human being cannot free that person in fetters. The Talmud says, "Ein chavish mater esatzmei." A person in fetters, tied up, or in a pit, cannot free themselves. Psychologically speaking, you cannot free yourself from the psychological trap that you created, because you're part of the problem. Okay, Einstein and others have said you cannot change a system from within itself. Or rephrased, you cannot solve a problem from the system that created the problem. So if the problem is created within your psyche, how is it going to be solved by you? You won't be able to see it. So that's why you need a force, surrender to a force that's greater than you. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, something more powerful than you are. That helps you reach that place. Now, the interesting phenomenon is this. Why is it that people have to hit rock bottom, or have to suffer, or some trauma, some crack, before they're able to see some light? Why is it when we're riding high and things are going well, it's so difficult to pierce? So of course the usual answer is because we're crazy, basically a little. We're all nuts. And that's how it is. We're a little crazy. I don't mean this in any insulting way. I'm the same human race as you are. We have this nutty thing. I know a guy, pretty well, and fortunately he had a terminal condition, and it was diagnosed that he would be gone within a very short period of time. I went to see him in the hospital, and in such a vulnerable state, I use that word intentionally, he was very, his whole life he says, so many mistakes I made, I would do things so different, my focus, my priorities. So I said to him, if God blesses you and heals you, will you remember what you just said? So he said, of course, I'm basically, the doctors are telling me I'm dead in a few days. I see life completely different. It's like I only have a few days left. I would do so many things different. Well, I prayed and told him, God should bless you, should be healed completely and everything should be good. But remember what you said. Inside of me I said, I'd like to see that happen. But what happens to this guy? How do you like that? He gets healed. He recovers miraculously. And he comes back to life. And everything goes back to regular. And when I meet him and I say, remember that? I don't know. Once the curtain closed up again, I just came back. I'm back to what I was. Even though he was there, he remembers it. I remember it vividly. So one of the big, I remember who wrote it, maybe it was John Bradshaw, one of the early pioneers in the 70s of the inner child therapies. He was himself a son of an abusive pastor, a son of an alcoholic. And he became and he writes a lot about shame. I don't know if you heard of John Bradshaw. So I think it was him, maybe not. Anyway, I saw this somewhere, a parable. They're called the parable of the Prince of Darkness. So I know you may not have come here for a group therapy session or a rehab session, but hey, you know what? We use whatever it takes. So the classic parable of the Prince of Darkness, they call it the Prince of Darkness. I don't know if you ever heard the story. It's a parable. So a guy lives his life, one of these guys, these swingers, does everything, he does whatever he wants, hurts people, betrays people, uses everybody, he's an exploitive guy, handsome and all the qualities. Basically lives a life of sin, selfishness, narcissism, indulgence. I hope you don't know anybody like this. But unfortunately there are a number of people like this, and they're riding high. When things are going well, everything is great. But day in his day comes, what we say after 120 years, whatever the amount, he's up in heaven now. He's standing before the tribunal, heavenly court. The day of accounting has come. It's like the story of the portrait of Dorian Gray type of thing. But here there was no portrait, so he has to now stand the trial. And what has he got to do? What is he going to say? He hears all the accusations and everything. He says, you did this to this woman, and you did this to this guy, and this, and everything. Everybody's life who he destroyed, left in the wake, in the dust. He's listening to it all. He knows it's all true. He's not going to have much to say to defend himself. But of course, everything has to have deliberation. This is due process. So the court listens to all the arguments and all that, back and forth. And they say, okay, we'll go out into the celestial halls and chambers outside of the heavenly court, and wait till we give you your verdict. So he's out there, all despondent and down, because he had a lot of fun, but now come to collect the bill. As he's there, all depressed, of course, the Prince of Darkness comes and says, hey, what's going on? He says, hey, look what just happened. I lived a life like this and like that, a life of self-indulgence, and now time of accounting. The Prince of Darkness says, there's always hope. I have a deal for you. Here's the deal. For your soul, I'd like you to I'll give you the opportunity to go back down to earth and relive your whole life. You have another chance. Guy's very impressed. That's a pretty good deal. But he's not stupid. He's shrewd. But he's not as shrewd as the Prince of Darkness, but he thinks he is. So he says, okay, that's a good deal, but I want my memory as well. Because you'll send me back down, I'll do everything again because I won't remember what happened here. No problem. We sign right here. You get your memory. You remember everything. You remember everything you did. You remember the consequences. You'll remember that you're going to be accountable. No problem at all. The deal, agreement is sold. He gives him his soul, whatever that means. But it's a parable. And he gets a second chance. He's sent down to earth. And what do you think happens? This is the end of the parable. He remembers everything. He remembers exactly what happened up there. He does exactly everything exactly the same as he lived his first life. The point in the parable is, this is used a lot in healing. You are forever an addict. You are forever going to be trapped if you think you're overconfident. And don't think just because you remember, just because you hit rock bottom, and you remembered and saw a deeper truth, that when you go back and things are good again, you're going to, even if you have a memory, but you're going to, for some reason, have this disconnect, this dissonance. It's used in many different ways of not building overconfidence. It can be used in very harsh ways, but it's also a truth. And this is very true. Look at our lives. They say insanity is doing something the same way and expecting different results. That's how we are. It's a weird thing, but that's how we are. So the concept of finding hope is not that simple. For some reason, it takes a crack in your armor, a crack in your chink in your life to wake you up. Because when things are going well, there's some dissonance that doesn't allow us to entertain the ability to grow, to see a better thing. So the interesting twist is this: when do we become open to higher truths? Is when we become vulnerable. The vulnerability we avoid, which we hate, that happens to open us up. Because when things are going well, you think you're invulnerable. Who thinks they're going to die? Look at life. We all know mathematically everybody will die. Yeah, who lives their life that way? I mean, there are people who think about it all the time. But most of us we don't think, okay, you know what, I'm like one day closer to death and therefore I better get my act together. We don't think that way. And all you need is proof, is all these different gimmicks they call forced savings. Or automatically debit your account. Why do they have to do that? Because we just won't stick to it. That's how we are. We need to have all kinds of tricks. So there's something about a certain inertia about our status quo that's very powerful and exerts more energy than you may think. It's deceptive because the status quo doesn't sound loud and powerful. It's not like someone pulling you somewhere. It's on the contrary. You're trapped where you are. And how much power is there in that status quo? So if someone was pulling you and saying, you know what, here, seducing you, or pulling you, you could say, it's a big strength, I'm going to resist. But it's very hard to resist a power that doesn't look so powerful. And that's your status quo, your comfort zone. That's why a crack shifts things. Things didn't work out exactly as you planned, then suddenly you're upset. It upsets the balance, and it shakes up your status quo, basically. What do you do when something is frozen in place? Sometimes you got to crack it. There's no way around it. Psychologically too, sometimes you need shock to your system. Because if not, you're just going to continue doing what you're doing. As long as you can be comfortable, that's what you're going to do. And especially if within is a very insecure little child that does not know how to be vulnerable, you're going to do everything possible to appear invulnerable. You're going to do everything possible to make believe like nothing can faze you. Until there's no choice. Until something happens where you have to acknowledge it. That's why I was using the 12-step program, because one of the powerful things is that acknowledgement. As soon as you acknowledge you're vulnerable, what happens? You start becoming stronger. The lack of acknowledgement is is the undoing, because it's like convincing yourself everything is great, I'm functioning. What they call functioning addicts are far more dangerous than dysfunctioning addicts, Because it's functioning, everything is working, they got it all worked out. So it's like almost nothing, it's like a thief who knows how to get away with it. Now, people who are very secure, and people who are of a higher consciousness, you'll find that they're vulnerable even without being hurt. It's the rare exception, but there are people like that. I mentioned last week that the statement from the Arizal, the Holy Arizal, Isaac Lurie, he says that a soul is not complete. The 10 days of tshuva is not complete a soul that doesn't cry. And not because crying over a particular loss. We cry. Yeah, you stub your toe, you can cry. You lose something. You're hurt, a loss, a death. Obvious, those things evoke tears. But when's the last time a person cried simply for no other reason because they just cried? They heard a song and they cry. Not because it reminds them of anything, any loss. Existential type of tears. You just can cry. Sometimes you can cry just by thinking about life itself. Again, not due to a negative thing. That type of sensitivity is a vulnerability that is the greatest strength of all. People who are extremely secure and have never been hurt, and grew up around people who are secure, have no problem with this vulnerability. Because it's not a weakness. They don't feel it as a weakness. Men don't cry, they say. Where does that stereotype come from? Because you got to be tough. And if you cry, it's a sign of lack of toughness. But who are the people you can trust most in life are the people who are sensitive, who have empathy. You want someone who's in touch that way, that can cry and not become weaker for it, but stronger. But it's not a popular concept today, which is why, going back to why vulnerability is a negative word. We live in a world, especially the Western world. The Eastern world is somewhat different. But in the Western world, the most dominant figure in Western psychology in the last 100 years is Sigmund Freud. Yes, there have been many detractors and changes, and Carl Jung and the different approaches that are very different than Freud. But even those that detracted, Freud still remains a force to contend with, the one to disagree with. And many of his principles are even in the other systems as well. It's not so black and white. Now, Freud was a nice Jew, so I can talk about one of ours, of the tribe, as they say. Definitely had a complicated relationship with his mother, we know that. But who doesn't have one, But he turned it into an industry. So Freud's concepts, which were revolutionary to modern psychology, frankly, from a Jewish perspective, are not revolutionary at all. They were just never, they will call it institutionalized. They were never turned into a formula. But it was the basic knowledge of every Jewish home in the shtetls. And it's not a surprise. Freud came as a Jew, came and understood that. And there are people who associate very clearly his understanding of the psyche and so on. Now, he wasn't aware of Kabbalah and mysticism. We could see that from his writings. His understanding of Moses is quite almost childish. If you have any knowledge of Torah, he was not knowledgeable in Torah, you can tell. But he had Jewish genes, that's for sure. So had he been aware of mysticism, it may have changed everything. Also, he was interested in building a career, building a reputation. Ego was not a non-factor in Freud's life. He was not one of the selfless guys. And these things also tend to distort, perspectives and how you present things and how you so-called control words and so on. But the idea of unconscious is not Freud's creation. It's pure Kabbalistic thought, pure Jewish thought. Jewish thought talks about unconscious consistently and very openly. It's not even hidden. It's not cryptic. The only thing is, he made it popular in a secular world. They can talk about it. But if you read the Arizal's Eitz Chaim, full of the concept Moiches Tema, which means the unconscious mind, the concealed mind, the hidden mind, is a theme that is in the Zohar, in the writings of Arizal, plenty, and discussed at length. But the thing with Freud is, what did he identify? What he called the id. The id. A German word. And the way he described the id was basically sometimes he described it almost like a sexually craved, selfish narcissist that has no control. is the selfish me. Everything is me. And then he comes with that concept of an ego and a superego, which are essentially the checks and balances to coexist with others. You can't just be driven by the id. You have to have these so-called filters. And that's how we live our lives. But at the heart of everything is either the sexual selfish drive or just selfish drive. There's different variations how people interpret it. Now you'll say, does everybody believe that today in the Western world? I can't say everybody agrees with it completely, but it's definitely one of the dominant viewpoints. And when you throw into what we'll call the Darwinian Freudian model, even though you don't have to associate the two, and some call what they call social Darwinism, is essentially the idea of survival of the fittest. Richard Dawkins made it popular in his book called The Selfish Gene. The gene is essentially an inherently selfish entity. The rule of nature is, I must survive at all costs. And I will do whatever it takes to survive. If I have to consume you, so be it. Survival of the fittest. It's the cardinal rule of existence that I must perpetuate myself. Hence the selfish gene. It goes to the extent, if you go to extreme evolutionary theorists, they will explain everything. Even altruism and nobility and sensitivity and everything that we attribute to being something like selfless, it's all selfish. Selflessness is also part of selfishness because the nature rewards the selfless because they get respected. Once you do that, obviously, it develops into quite a cynical system to basically dismiss anything we do, any altruistic act, any kind act, as basically being another selfish gene. This one's doing it by killing someone. This one's doing it by giving charity. I mean, it really comes down to that. I mean, when you read it, it's very brutal in a way. No one wants to put it that way, but ultimately, that's what it comes down to. In the harshest version of it. Obviously, there are more milder versions. You read Carl Jung, so of course he brings in a whole spiritual dimension. Viktor Frankl in logotherapy, man in search of meaning. So you have meaning is the essence, not the id. They have different drives. But as much as I've read, I always see that it always comes up somewhere or another. Freudian theory continues to be cast its shadow. And as I said, it's the one to contend with. Not everyone agrees. I maintain that clearly. But I always think about it because we have a Torah long before Freud was there. What does the Torah have to say about this? So 100 years before Freud was a man called the Alter Rebbe. He wrote the great book called the Tanya, which is a deeply psychological book, and also writes about the unconscious. And a key comparative difference between the two is this, 100-year difference. But the Alter Rebbe precedes Freud. If Freud calls it the id, being the core drive and outside of us, the Alter Rebbe would call it the yid. That it's not the id that's the driving force, it's the yid, which means the pintel yud, which is a spark, a yud, is a dot. That if you dig deeper, you find at the core something divine within each of us. And it's actually the Bible. Are we essentially evil or essentially good? The Bible says we were created in the image of God. Only in chapter 2 do we start reading that there's Yetzer Leva Adam Ram and Urav, that we also have an inclination that is selfish. But the inherent human being is the Yid, not the Id. And I say this about all human beings, Jew or non-Jew. At the core is goodness because at the core is God. You know the joke they tell, that in France they were digging and they discovered like 150 feet under the ground, they found copper wires. They date back like 100 200 years ago, a few hundred years ago. So they came to the conclusion that in France they already discovered copper wires 200 years ago. Okay, well, they were digging in another country. Where is it? Let's call it England. And they find 1,000 years ago, they find down around 1,000 feet below. 1,000 years ago they found a different type of wire. They say, we preceded you. Well, in Israel, not to be outdone, some researcher began to dig, and he dug 10,000 feet below and found nothing. She says, well, we had wireless, back then. So, it's pulling rank. You can put it this way. The idea of the unconscious is complicated because no one's seen the unconscious. So you can theorize. I will say, I have no doubt, Freud can only go as far as that he was able to understand himself. He dug into himself and found, what did he find when he hit the bottom? He found a wire called the id. The Alter Rebbe must have dug deeper, and he found something called the id. So it really comes down to what you see. You can look at the world and see a jungle, as I said, a dark place, and then vulnerability is dangerous. Because you're living in a hostile world. You need to protect yourself. If the id indeed is the driving force of human beings, then being vulnerable is not a very healthy thing to be in this world where anybody can use you and exploit you. And they will do so. The selfish gene will do so. So you better be on your guard. And vulnerability is not a virtue. But if at the heart of it all is a world of divine, and if you dig deeper, you find forces that are spiritual, power, positive, good energy, that's a whole different story. That is actually there. Vulnerability is a virtue, not a liability. It's a virtue. Because how do you experience beauty? How do you experience love? Can you listen to a song? Can you look at a flower without being vulnerable? Do I have to even explain that? So many of us will say, that's no problem. I do it in my privacy. Nobody has to know that I'm vulnerable. But you're vulnerable. Just nobody knows. Because you won't get hurt. But you're experiencing the most resonating experiences are all connected to vulnerability. Dealing with children, I mentioned children. Love, your soul, beauty, music, sensuality. You name it. It's all about vulnerability is the tool that experiences that. Being invulnerable and being all powerful and aggressive is not a tool to find something of beauty within yourself or another. Love itself, intimacy, sexuality. I'm talking about it in its healthy form, not as used in any other way. What is it if it's not being vulnerable? But it's very difficult to be vulnerable because we have been hurt, and we could be hurt, and we've seen hurt. That means we're letting the hostile world or the hurting world affect the experience that is most vital in experiencing the real you. What does that say? So it's a good question to ask yourself. How much of who you are today is being undermined? The real you is being undermined due to your experiences that have hurt you. So you're creating all kinds of armor and protections and fears, maybe even legitimate ones. And the bottom line is, the part of you that is the most precious part, that soul inside, is locked and trapped because you've become a victim to all these circumstances. And you're perpetuating it because that's how you see yourself and others. So the answer to this is, instead of looking at the month of Av as just an outside month of destruction, look at it as the birth of greatness. Comes Elul. And what does it teach us? That within it all is some deeper love. You need to see a different picture. If all you've grown up around is hate, obviously your life will be shaped by that, and that's how you'll react. The antidote to that is to find love, is to find something to look at that's equally powerful and compelling, and say, I don't have to shape my life around the hatred I've seen, I shape it around the love I've seen. I told a story last week about this, the Holocaust story. The guy was praying, and the Nazi asked him, what are you praying? He says, I thank God for not creating me like you. You see people who suffered greatly, and they come out more refined than ever, and do not become bitter and angry, and become like they don't become like those that perpetrated the evil against them. How's that possible? Because they have clearly another perspective. If you're a neutral person, you will be shaped by what has happened to you. If you've experienced hate and you've been at the brunt of hate, you have been the recipient of hatred and all that comes with it, what else would you have except to become a hateful person? The only alternative is because you've seen something else. I often deal with a situation where someone growing up in a home where one parent extremely dysfunctional, other parent very very functional. That exists as well. Not all dysfunctional people marry dysfunctional people, just for the record. So you have a situation, sometimes you see a mother that's very unhealthy, the father very healthy, or vice versa. No one has a monopoly on this. All depends on what families they grew up in. And it's very interesting to see a child like that growing into an adult because they have both. They had a model of hysteria, of insecurity, of fears, of tantrums and anger. And they have a model of the opposite. And there's no real rule who's going to dominate. It's almost you can't predict. It comes down to ultimately sometimes where the child is wired, what they've been exposed to. Sometimes you see both elements. So there's no way that you can say that all of us are one way or another. We probably have a mixed, I would say definitely that we all have mixed tools. I've never met a person that has 100% negative, dysfunctional tools. Even very dysfunctional people always have some positive tools. That's how it is. And vice versa. There's no one that has it all perfect. The challenge is what we call the snowball effect. In Kabbalistic and Hasidic lexicon, there's a concept called taruves tevira. It means when good and evil get all mixed up into one big chunk. And that some ways that's considered to be worse than real evil, pure evil. Because when something is bad, and you know this is bad, you just avoid it, and that's it. But what happens if the bad and good are mixed together? It's a person that's very kind to you, loves you, but they also have another side to them. Those are far more destructive experiences. Because number one, it creates insecurity, unpredictability. What's with this person? Loving, not loving. That's why, by the way, abuse that comes from parents or from anyone that's close to you is the worst type of abuse. Because it's coming from a place where love is supposed to be coming. A stranger is a stranger. Initially, you're wired differently. But when something loves you, and they actually show love, and then a day later or a minute later show something that's the opposite of love, it plays with your wires. You start saying, is it loving, is it hating? You start coming to think that love and hate come together. As bizarre as it sounds, people who grow up in that type of environment, it's strange. Love and hate, love and pain come together. They expect someone that loves you is going to hurt you. Someone that loves me is going to hurt me. And if it doesn't happen, they almost help make it happen. I know it may sound bizarre. If it sounds bizarre to you, it probably means you're probably healthy in this area at least. But it's not so bizarre for those that have experienced it. Because that's what happens. So the snowball effect, which is like everything is mixed together, taruvis, is a complicated. Because what you really want to do is what it says in the book of Daniel. You want clarity. I want to know what is, like we say in this week's chapter. Today, behold, today I show you the path of blessing and the path of curse. Knowing what's right, knowing what's wrong for you is just as big blessing as knowing what's right for you. You're traveling in the woods, you're lost, and you come to across a fork in the road. So Yogi Berra says, you come to a fork in the road, take it. However, we say, so the person tells you, which is more precious, more valuable? Someone says to you, this is the path to take. Someone says to you, this is the path not to take. It's hard to say. Because we may be told what path to take, but how many mistakes would have been avoided in our lives if someone had told us, don't go down that road? So knowing what not to go on is just as valuable as knowing what to go on. That's what clarity does. And these are all tools that help us navigate. So the backdrop that I'm trying to paint here is the backdrop of the month of Elul. For us to figure it out on our own is extremely difficult. Because as I said, our status quo, first of all, exerts terrible amount of power on us. We have distortions, we all have distortions. So how do you bring somebody to another place? You have to take them out of their comfort zone. I think I mentioned this. You have advertising agencies, a lot of creative brainstorm sessions. You know how you really get some people to really come up with the best? You have to get them completely out of their comfort zone. So I read in some agency in California, they take for a week, and they have a serious client, a new client, ad agency. They take their top copywriters and designers and so on to a retreat. But it's not just a retreat. They take some type of children's amusement park. So you're talking about adults here that are now expected to be playing in sand lots and on swings and bringing them back to where they were 6 years old. And they have them do that. And they play the paintball, and they dress up like clowns, complete insanity. And then they have these breakout sessions, and they come up with unbelievable stuff. Because they take them completely out of their thing. They don't think like they do when they sit in the same office. Look out the same window for the last 20 years. Whatever amount. Many of the websites that are really cutting edge, the first generation now as well, they insist to have students of computer science that have never created or seen websites before. You don't want to be shaped by that which exists. Because status quos and comfort zones do not tend to lend itself to creativity, to fresh air. So the idea of depicting a new picture is critical. Because how else are you going to change your context? That's what the Jewish calendar does. Come month of Av, okay. That was the sad, the Ferris wheel at the bottom. Now comes Elul. New possibilities, it's a new mazel, it's a new sign, new energy. Every month has its own energy. It's a month of renewal, hope, the 13 attributes of compassion. It's a whole month with energy. Anila Deidi, I am to my beloved is to me. Out of the comfort zone. Let's paint another picture. Your picture is dark and foreboding. So obviously you're going to see vulnerability as a liability. But if you have a different picture of yourself and of others, then vulnerability becomes a tremendous tool. And hence the expression, the invincibility of vulnerability. It's a concept in Jewish mysticism. Everything in this world can be destroyed, except one thing. That which has already destroyed itself. Well, I should put it in different words. Everything that is something can be turned into nothing. But something that is nothing cannot be turned into nothing, because it's already nothing. Mathematically correct, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 can always be diminished. 0 cannot be diminished. 0 times anything is 0. You can't diminish it. What does it mean psychologically? So let's define it. A person can worship themselves and be able to achieve the work of 20 men, 20 women. Okay, great. I've seen people like that. Tremendously talented. They can do things that 20 people can't do. But only 20. And then they have their day too. Everybody changes. People age. The decaying process, the aging process. And then comes death. People who built monuments and great things, they die too. And what dies with them is everything that sometimes they've built. The only thing that lives on forever is something that is not about you. If you dedicate yourself to a cause that's not about yourself, to a cause greater than yourself, that cannot die, because it's not about you. So there's an expression in, I'll say it in Yiddish, Hebrew, then, bittel kenish bottel werden is the idea. Something that's selfless cannot be annihilated. Something that's a self can be. If your whole sustenance is to serve another, is to serve others, if your whole sustenance is to love another person, how can that ever be eliminated? Because what can someone take away from you? You're not defined by what you have, you're defined by what you give. It was Sir Moses Montefiore. You go to Israel, you see a lot Montefiore. Montefiore was a great philanthropist in England, time of Queen Victoria. He built Jerusalem, rebuilt Jerusalem. And Queen Victoria, who was herself a benevolent queen, Queen Victoria, she was once having a conversation with him. He was extremely wealthy. They were very close. He helped the British government and so on. And she asked him to give her an accounting of how much he's worth, his net worth. She said he needs a few days. He comes back and gives her a figure. And she says, nah. Sir Moses, you mock me. This number you're giving me is far less. I know personally that you're worth much more than that. And he said, no, I told you the true number. So how do you explain that? And he explained, I gave you the amount that I've given away to charity. That's the only thing that really belongs to me. Because anything I actually possess right now, I own, tomorrow can be lost. In bad investment, war, confiscated, all kinds of things could happen. So yes, I have it now, but it's not, I can't say that I own that. I possess it for now. But that which I've given away is forever built whatever I wanted to build. A hospital, a city, an institution, people. Nobody can ever take that. That's forever. That was his answer. You can imagine that's why he was who he was. Simple truth, but one we really found almost impossible to relate to. Because we don't think in terms that if you give something away, you get more. You think of you have less. But it's worth it. Someone will say, you know what, look, you have $1 million, you give a little away to charity. I'll have less, but the gratification that I helped somebody makes it worth it. I get in return something bigger. My spiritual return, whatever you want to call it. Food. I'll share with someone food because it's the right thing to do, but I'm not going to get fuller from that. I'm not going to have more food. Why? Because the rule of materialism is such. It's governed by time and space and measured in quantity. You give, you have less. That's the rule, mathematical certainty in this world. 100 minus 1 is 99, not 101. In the spiritual reality, the mathematics are exact opposite. When you give, you have more. Because it's not defined by quantity. It's not defined by space. It's not defined by time. So it's a whole different way of measuring. So in the material world, it's obvious that things erode and things that die, and that's why people, some even say psychologically, unconsciously, we hoard, and nothing is ever enough, because deep in our unconscious we know that it all dies. So you do anything possible to accumulate as much as you can, even though everyone knows you can't take it with you. As they say, when you come up above and the guy gives a check, they say, no, here we only take receipts. You know? They're all the fundraising lines that are used in appeals, Yom Kippur appeals and so. But we're not accustomed to a world like that, because we all live in a world of the selfish gene, the id, a world where vulnerability is a liability. You know, I'm going to give. If I give anything away, I'm going to be more exposed, more vulnerable. I have less to protect myself. That's the language of a material world. Anything material speaks that way. A spiritual entity doesn't think that way, because I'm not defined by what I have. It's not my possessions that define my security. I'm secure because of who I am. And therefore giving away makes me greater, not less. It's a very different mentality. I'm not expecting all of a sudden to change our mentality, but at least, as I said, paint a picture. Understand there's another reality. Just know at least that there's another perspective. That already, at least 1% challenges the perspective of the selfish gene perspective. And in that situation, that type of case, vulnerability is the greatest blessing. You know, as I get older myself, it's clear to me, like the day, that children are far closer to the truth than we'll ever be. And every day we get older, we're farther from that. Our purest, the purest version of yourself is version 1.0, the day you were born. I know in technology it works the other way around. 1.0 is like the lowest version, and it's only going up. But I think with human beings it's the other way around. The purest you is when you were untouched snow, like freshly fallen snow in the morning. I know it's hard to imagine New York in the middle of the summer, but the freshly fallen snow that has that pristine element before anybody ever walked on it. That's a child. Utter vulnerability, but utter purity. The greatest people I've met in my life, and there haven't been many, but the few I have met, are, at 90, they were just as vulnerable and as pure as like children, with the wisdom and experience of life. So it's, a child doesn't have the other side. Someone that's gone through the difficulties of life and has not been shaped by them, and still maintains the sparkle and the adventure and the free abandon and that enchantment of a child. It's unbelievable to see. They've not allowed themselves to be subject and rendered by material life into an old person. Yes, on their passport they're older, on their birth certificate, but in their spirit they're as young as they can be. So when you talk about vulnerability in this context, a person like that, vulnerability is they celebrate it. They cannot wait to sit with somebody and be vulnerable with them, because that's where reality is. Where was the holiest place on earth? Yom Kippur, the Holy of Holies. What happened in the Holy of Holies? You're not allowed to enter there any time of the year. Nobody. Not even the high priest, except a few moments on Yom Kippur. And I don't know if you know this, but when Yom Kippur, when the high priest entered the Holy of Holies, they would tie him with ropes, chains. Why? Because in case he had one blemish, Holy of Holies was so pure, he would die there. And since no one's allowed to go in, they would have to pull him out with the ropes. I know it sounds weird, but that's the story. Now, you may think it's like, what's going on here? Well, let's put it this way. Jigan and Schuchmacher, one of these old Yiddish, last generation Yiddish linguists and comedians. So one of their thing is the Jewish. Was one of their bits is, if you heard the Jewish theory of relativity, not the Einstein version. The Jewish theory of relativity is that 3 hairs on your head aren't much, but 3 hairs in the soup, that's the theory. So when you have a piece of dust on your finger, okay, big thing. You have a piece of dust on your eyeball, the same dust. So it's not about the dust; it's where it is. It's in a very sensitive and tender place. It's going to be it's going to be trouble. So it'll be irritating. The Holy of Holies was like the eyeball of the universe, the most sensitive place on earth. A little piece of dust there is not tolerant because of its holiness, not because of its judgmentalism or anger or negativity. It's pure. In the Garden of Eden, before Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, it was like the Holy of Holies in a way. That's why they were naked and they were not ashamed. What's wrong with being nude? Since when is sexuality an issue? It's only an issue for somebody who's conscious and has something to be hiding or something to feel guilty or ashamed about. Sexuality is as pure as anything. It's divine. As soon as they felt themselves and their consciousness came into being, now it's about you. Once it's about you, now starts the problems. Now they cover themselves with garments. The birth of the garment industry was right there when they ate from the tree of knowledge. Yeah. A lot of industries were born then. The search for paradise, a few other things. Fountain of youth. Probably the cosmetic industry too, started to have to hide behind masks. So, because in the pure world, a child that's born is a child conscious of its sexuality. No, why should it be? It's only adults that project that consciousness for obvious reasons. Something to feel guilty about. You're feeling selfish, you're feeling needy, you're feeling whatever it is. So, in the Holy of Holies, on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, is that pure place. So tell me, if you knew that inside of you there's a Holy of Holies, what do you think enters in that place? Vulnerability or invulnerability? Aggressive tools and power and forces? Or just letting everything go and just be yourself without any fears? So the problem is, the reason vulnerability is a problem for us is because we live in a world where vulnerability is a problem. Not because it per se is a problem. And we don't even know that there's another option. But imagine you had a place inside yourself that you could access. And more than that, if you can access it, then there others can access it too, if you allow them. Imagine 2 people can meet in that place. They would be celebrating their vulnerability all the time. So the problem is that aberration, as I mentioned before, the anomaly, the aberration is not that place. The aberration is the outside world where we need armor and protection. That's unnatural. However, for us, the unnatural has become the natural, because we're not familiar with that inner world. Some of us have never even heard that it exists. I'm sure some of you maybe heard about it for the first time right here. And even if we hear that it exists, it becomes a fantasy. I could access that? Where do I see it? We look at this world on which we live. Even if I wanted access, everyone around me is selfish. I'm the only selfless person on earth. Everybody else is selfish. So how does it help? But in Judaism, that's not how we think. Maimonides says it's not about looking at everybody else. That's people looking at people, looking at people, looking at people. You can go that ad infinitum. Maimonides says something very interesting. A person should always look at the world like an equal scale. Equal scale. Equal good and equal negative. And you come with one act, you tip the scale. Now, if we were to look at ourselves as one person among 7 billion people, what can I accomplish? One drop, it's meaningless. Even if I do something positive, look what everybody else is doing. That's not the way we look. We don't think like that. You're not asked to make calculations of how much good or what you can contribute or not. You have to look at yourself and the choices you make. Because if everybody's going to look at everybody else, you all know the analogy of this poor town. They hear this great king is coming to visit, but they want to give him a gift, but they have nothing, no means. So they said, you know what? He'll appreciate something that takes a little effort on our part. Made a decision. Everyone's going to take of their precious wine that they save for Shabbos and pour a bottle of wine into a big barrel, and we'll give the king the barrel of wine. So he'll know that wine is very precious stuff, very expensive for us. Everybody contributed, so it'll be a meaningless. It may not be valuable to the king, but it'll be valuable because he'll know that we all did something for him. Well, this is a town of smart people. So one smart Alex says to his wife, he says, you know what? Everybody's going to pour wine anyway. Why do we have to waste our wine? Why don't we just pour a bottle of water? Well, one bottle of water in a big barrel, big thing, no one's going to tell. They devise a whole scheme, good. They figure out how to do this, it looks like wine. Blah. The problem is every other family thought the same idea. So they ended up happening, the king got himself a big barrel of water. Or the other one, they talk about the Jewish rowing team, that is always losing in the competitions. And they said, you know what, go figure out what's going on there, the Harvard rowing team. Got to figure out how the non-Jews are always beating us. Okay, so this Jewish guy sneaks into the gym, into the locker room, see this, and this. He figures out, he comes back and says, it's very simple. There, one guy is yelling, and the 9 guys are rowing. Which means, by us, it's one guy rowing and 9 guys are yelling. That's the secret. So, if you don't feel that you can contribute, you're yelling. In Judaism, the way we look at yourself. There's nothing to do with what's going on around you. Really nothing. You look at all the great tzaddikim, pioneers, Avraham Avinu, Abraham, Moses. Not one of them, you show me one of them, they all did not look at anybody. They only looked at themselves. If they would look at everybody else, they would not doing anything. No pioneer ever looks at others. You look at others, you're not going to be a pioneer. You look at yourself, the tips are equal. I don't really care. So someone say, what do you mean tips are equal? The other guys also see things the tips are, the scale is equal. Yeah, that's his problem. I'm talking about me now. Because the only thing you know is your responsibility is what's on your plate. And one act changes everything. Now today that's also not miraculous. We know the butterfly effect. A butterfly flutters its wings in Kansas City, it creates a typhoon in Singapore. And this has been proven because the world is connected, small things, action, reaction, cause and effect, etc. So the attitude is to understand, is to look at ourselves and look at what we're capable and look that you have another side to you. You have a Holy of Holies. Yom Kippur, it will be revealed. But now begins a 40-day process that leads to that. Because obviously the more you prepare, the better you'll enter. And that place, it's such a sensitive place that only vulnerability works there. There are no lies. There's no masks. There's no aggressive tools. You come only you as you were born. Pure. Complete vulnerability. And it's the most refreshing experience. So to find a person that you can experience that within life, that's your soulmate if you can find that. Hands down. That's what you're looking for. But we have a whole other, obviously, checklist of needs and all that. It really comes down to really having someone you can trust. 2 trusting people. But you ask most people, they'll say it's far more complex. I'm not attracted to this thing and that thing. I'm not suggesting other things are not valuable, but this is the heart of it all. This is what you want. Because you can have everything else, you don't have this, you don't have a relationship. You have your needs met. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And this brings me back to what nothing is and something. Something that's nothing cannot be annihilated. Ego, very easy to. The taller they are, the greater they are, the harder they fall. Something that's not defined by self, how can you annihilate that? Pharaoh made this mistake, thankfully, and so did all other anti-Semites. When he heard from his stargazers that a man will rise and be the savior and take the Jews out of Egypt, and he'll lose all his slave labor. This great Pharaoh, very smart man, said, you know what? Simple. Let's do this. By the way, the sound is working good. Yeah. He decreed, kill all the little baby boys. That way, this Moses, this man, will never rise. He'll never grow up. And he killed many. The girls he left alone. What happened? The Talmud says, Torah says, the husbands told their wives, you know what, let's stop having children until this decree is over. It's going to kill all our boys. Now, they didn't love their daughters, but he said, let's avoid this whole thing. The woman said very simply, what are you talking about? We don't have children. We're all going to die in this godforsaken place. We'll never get out of here. And the woman prevailed. And they found ways. The Talmud says some women went to the field when they had to give birth. Yocheved, the mother of Moses, took the little boy, as we know the story, put him in a basket on the Sea of Reeds. They found ways. That doesn't mean there wasn't plenty of children killed, God forbid, tragically. This Pharaoh could not destroy. See, the mistake he made was, as usually we project. Kol HaPoisel says we project our strengths onto others or our weaknesses. He thought, who's strong? Men are strong. They bear arms. They're aggressive. They're the warriors. That's my enemy. Women and children, they could be subdued. What he did not count on was the power of faith. He did not count that the women are going to say, you know what, we're going to figure it out one way or another. And that's it. All you needed was one boy to make it. And Moses was the guy. And Pharaoh's entire stargazers helped nothing, all his tricks. You cannot destroy the invisible. You can only destroy the visible. You can destroy. You're strong? I can be stronger than you. Vulnerability can't be destroyed. Because vulnerability is not shaped and defined by what it is. It's shaped and defined by what it's not. How could you destroy that? Someone who celebrates vulnerability and that for them is their divine, is their essence. You could take away something from someone that if they possess it. You can't take away something that they don't possess, so to speak. And ultimately it comes down to the people who really celebrate that vulnerability know that their lives are not their own. They don't see their lives as me, I'm great. They see their lives as being a divine gift. And therefore, how could you take that away from them? What are you going to take from them? If you take it away, it still remains a divine gift. So what? It doesn't take on the shape of a physical body. This cannot be destroyed. This is the reason, and the reason that most people cannot understand, it has never been replicated. Why the Jewish people are still here. Now tell me, do you think the Romans didn't want us to live on forever? Or the Egyptians, or the Spanish Empire, or the Babylonians, or the Assyrians? Of course, which they all wanted to immortalize themselves. The pharaohs of old built those pyramids and they tried to find ways of immortalizing themselves. Everybody wants to be immortalized. The bigger the ego, the more immortal it wants to be. So how come they couldn't study the Jewish people and figure out what the trick is? Hey, you have a people that have survived it all, thousands of years. You know why? Because even if they know the formula, they're not willing to pay the price. The price is not to want to immortalize yourself. The price is to do exactly what you don't want. And that's how you become immortal. If you think it's going to be me and my name and my power, that's going to prevail. Power changes hands. The one that's in power today, tomorrow the wheel turns, as I said. The Jewish people were always compared to the moon. You know why the moon is more powerful than the sun? Because it doesn't think it's something. Somebody thinks it's something, that's the problem. The moon knows it has no light of its own. All it is the light of the sun. How could you destroy that? You can't take away something that has nothing. There's a Bob Dylan that sings, and you have nothing to lose. So that may be in the negative, but the positive is also true. If all you are is a reflection or a channel of something greater than yourself, how could that be taken away from you? You've already given away yourself to that being that channel. This is the secret, my friends. But this secret nobody wants to replicate because it goes against everything that our ego dictates. And the moment, the instant gratification, I want power now and I want influence, undermines this. There's an expression, anyone that pursues honor, the honor eludes them. And anyone that runs away from honor, the honor pursues them. So how do you deal with this exactly? So there are people who think they can figure it out. You know what I'll do? I'll run away from the honor, but I'll look over my shoulder to make sure it's running after me. That doesn't work. That's the point. Moses, on the mountain in the 40 days in Elul, turns to God and says, and we read this in the chapter in Exodus, show me your face. Or he says, show me your glory is the expression. Hareini nas chveidecha. And God says the famous immortal words, God says, Lo yireini adam v'chai, no person can see me and live. And then he goes on and says, I will show you my back, but my face you will not see. The question is asked, Panim Yofis and some others, what's going on here? First of all, when Moses is not smart enough to know you can't see God's face and live, if you, like he says, Ilu Yadait, they say, if you knew me, you'd be me. To see God is to be God. Moses someone has to be told, God has to tell him that. And then, what's this thing that I'll show you the back and not my face, and then he rubs it in. He already said you can't see me and live. And then he says, but my face you won't see. Like what is it, just rubbing his nose into it and saying, and then why are we told all this anyway? If Moses' request was rejected, we have to document it for what purpose? And the answer is unbelievable answer. It goes like this. God's not saying to Moses, the way you're supposed to read the verse is not God saying, my back, I'll show you my back and my face you will not see. It's supposed to say like this, I will show you my back and my face. But my face you'll see by not looking at it. There are things we see by looking at it, and there are things we extrapolate by not looking at it. When two people truly, truly love each other in the deepest possible way, do they really get each other or they don't? In the deepest moment of intimacy, is there the bond is one of conscious control or conscious of lack of control? And you don't need to always understand something to get it. Sometimes when you try to look at it, it will elude you. By not looking at it, then you have it. If you try to own it, you lose it. The true things in life are always that way. Truth is that way. Love is that way. God is that way. Soul is that way. Anything real that's eternal, that's the rule. It emerges, you can never own it. As soon as you own it, you don't have it. That's what God was saying to Moses. And Moses wanted to experience it. And God said, you want to experience it? Fine. But you can't experience it by looking. You have to experience things by giving up. And then you'll have it. So there are experiences. The best example I can give is, I don't know if any of you ever, let's put it this way, if you're in writing or any other creative, actually everyone has examples of this. They call it being in the zone. You can be trying to write, let's say, a beautiful piece. Or if you're an artist, some other form of art, music, or anything. And as long as you're sensing that you're busy doing it, you're not there yet. There comes a point where you lose sense of yourself, and you simply become a channel and it just flows through you. And as soon as you think you feel yourself, you lose it. It's almost, and when you have that, it's the greatest gift. And you cannot in any way bottle that. Because if you try to bottle it, you lose it. It's a state of almost not being conscious of yourself while you're doing it. And you only know after the fact, you realize you were there. It's like saying that love is not a verb but a noun. When you're in the experience, you become one with the experience that you can't even say, I had the experience. You really feel that as if you're a channel for something beyond you. I hope that resonates. And if you've had a taste of that, you know what I'm talking about. That's an example. You can see it, but not by looking at it. And that is a state of vulnerability. That's the invincibility of vulnerability. Because that can never be destroyed. But as I said, the tools, the world in which we live in, the tools which we use are all about acquisition. We acquire this, I own this, and what do you own? And equity, and you own this. Everybody's got their list of things that you own. And then some people check it every 5 minutes to make sure they still have it, or at least to give them a say, if everything else is gone, at least I have this in my bank account. And literally, you can't imagine, people will never admit how vulnerable they feel, but they're constantly checking all these, make sure that their possessions are there. And then we have insurance to make sure that it protects them. We have insurance for the insurance. and as many levels as you may need for your security. And then there are people who have none of that, but they feel more secure than anybody you'll ever meet. Because they're not defined by anything outside. You can't take anything away from them because they're not defined by what they own. They talk about the Jewish leaders. A Jewish leader is defined, leadership. What's leadership? Most of us see leaders. Leaders are defined by what they have. They're leaders with a lot of wealth, a lot of ambition, a lot of connections, a lot of horse dealing, a lot of corruption, a lot of something or another. In Judaism, the leaders, the kings, were, how they were defined? By what they did not have. No ego, bittul. Moses was the humblest man that walked on earth. Now that doesn't mean he didn't know his qualities. It meant that he knew his qualities, but he said, they're not my own. They were given to me by God. Had someone else been given these qualities, they would have done better than I. And this was not just not just lip service. He sincerely felt that. A person like that can never be destroyed. Because he's not built by himself. Nothing can destroy him. He becomes a channel for something beyond himself. So I hope some of these words that I said here will help us appreciate or try to enter a new type of world where vulnerability is actually the greatest asset, as opposed to a world that's hostile, where vulnerability is the greatest liability. Very different worlds. Vulnerability is basically you in your purest form, without fears, and without all the accrements that cause us to live in fear and live in insecurity and need to protect ourselves. Practically speaking, can you enter such a world? Yes, you can. That doesn't mean that you can just do it anywhere in any situation. It's finding environments and finding moments where you access your Holy of Holies. This can be in moments of study, of prayer, meditation, contemplation, with friends. It could be swimming. It can be in love. It can be taking a stroll. We all have tastes of this. Everybody relates to it because it resonates, but the problem is we don't have control over it. It's more like almost like little escapes that we take, the places we go to for some solace. But to see it as a model for life, something that you can aspire to, that everything in life is meant to lead you to that place. For most of us, as I said, it's a compartmentalized experience. I know I'm going on vacation, I think I'll have a little peace there. Maybe that's called the Holy of Holies for me. I'll be a little vulnerable on my own somewhere. But to turn that into a standard, that is your life, and the rest is only meant to be a stage for you to experience your own inner vulnerability, that's a different type of story. So like they say, we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. We're not aggressive, selfish creatures that from time to time have some type of spiritual epiphany. We're spiritual, vulnerable entities. We're children having an adult experience, not adults that were once children. And definitely not children who are just adults in formation. Adults in the making. So my friends, look, you all have that inner child, you all have that inner spirit, and the ability to really celebrate it. Learning to celebrate vulnerability is the greatest gift in life. Then you're real. That's where reality begins to enter. Up till that point, you can go through many motions, you can do a lot of good things, but it's all little pieces of not the real thing. The real pure thing is that ability to not have the fears and know that you have that place inside of you that nothing can hurt, and therefore there's nothing to protect from. The challenge is to find the right friends and the right environments, as I said, the right people, to be able to somewhat have taste of it. One of the most healing, I would say refreshing things in life is to do something without an agenda for your own gain. Jews come together, we come to study Torah. Here with a class like this, people online. You're not going away here with any awards or degrees or some type of recognition. Everybody's got their reasons why they're sitting here. Or any type of Torah class. One of the beautiful things about it is, you go to a seminar, real estate tips, or how to do this or how to do that. There are the most purifying experiences, the ones that do not feed into your selfishness. So one thing that's a suggestion to start, let's call exercising, somewhat massaging that vulnerable gene inside each of us, that vulnerable nerve inside each of us, is to do things for the sake of another, not for your sake, or for the sake of just the experience itself, not for direct gain. That's very refreshing experiences, because most of us, what we do something for personal gain. I mentioned last week that fellow who lived in the gilded cage, and for him he found it by volunteering to help needy children, special children, and changed his whole life. The special children, because suddenly he was doing something that was not fitted into his comfort zone. For a party, to show off, something like that. He was dealing with real children. It was real. A Down syndrome child, a child with some other handicap or illness. Yeah, the reality is there. There's no games. You're dealing with someone that's their life. It brings out a truth. No one should ever know of that. I'm not suggesting, but for him it was the biggest blessing. I hope for the children it was also a blessing to meet him, but for him for sure. It's the biggest blessing, because he had to face reality. Unfortunately, sometimes, as I said earlier, pain and cracks in life show us reality more. But you don't have to wait for that. It's there all the time. You just have to find people that are honoring and celebrating that. But regardless how you come to it, that is where reality plays itself out. Everything else, my friends, are means, the stepping stones. This is where the music is played. This is where your destiny plays itself out. This is where your immortality is determined or not determined. Will you live on forever or not? It's not going to be all the games we play. I don't think I have to even prove that everybody knows that all games come to an end. The thing that remains are the things the face that we see when we're not looking. And that is things that are far different. One of the greatest levels of charity is to give matan b'seisa, to give charity no one knows about, anonymous. The giver is anonymous, and the recipient doesn't know who's giving, and the giver doesn't know who's receiving. Why is that so powerful? So the obvious reason is because it's like without ulterior motive. It's not because you're making yourself feel good. The guy sees that you helped him. It doesn't have all that. It gets rid of all the side agendas. Okay, that's the obvious reason, but there's something deeper. Matan b'seisa touches a place that's not in your control. That's what it's about. It's doing something good that's not in your control. Because it's looking at the face without looking. It's seeing the face by not looking at it. Because we usually like control. To do something that is beyond. It's like almost surrendering to something that you don't own. When you know something, you own it. When you surrender to it, you don't own it. And an interesting thing, you have much more power when you surrender to it than when you own it. Ownership is ownership. But that can never. But that is. That invulnerability of that nature is vulnerable. And the vulnerability I'm talking about is invulnerable, is invincible. So we all have that paradox that the real vulnerable is the most invincible. The things we think are invulnerable are the most vulnerable. Or they say, the greatest risk of all is not taking any risk. So, as we approach the month of Elul, I hope you all can embrace the new energy of this month. Find the love within it. Find the love within ourselves. The ability to surrender to love and not just to own it and control it. And that is guaranteed to open you up to finding the person that you deserve to love and be loved by. That's what Elul. I am to my beloved and my beloved to myself. It's reaching I am to my beloved. It's not about I am to me and then my beloved is a certain prop in my life. I am to my beloved. You surrender to your beloved will surrender to you. And it can't be conditional. It's not like the guy says, I'll unconditional love if you love me in return. You have to really, you can't fake it. You got to really be ready to give it up. So, as we approach this month of El, we also begin the journey, the 60 days. As you know, the book I've written, we're going to be sending out a daily email. Anybody that wants to get it, you can subscribe to it. We'll be soon sending out a reminder. I think the books are also available, but in any other way that I could help, or we could help Meaningful Life Center, your journey, please let us know. It's an honor a vulnerable honor to travel with you through this life. And I believe Philip is not giving his class till at the end of the summer. Right? We will be here next Wednesday. Again, a great pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you very much.